Yeah? Sorry, Andrew.
Right.
No?
Yep. Governor, a lot of issues to discuss, but firstly, the market seems to be reading this as a hawkish cut today. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, I think what it reflects is that there are two sides. There are risks on both sides here. So there's a risk on one side that we could get a much more severe weakness of demand than we're expecting. That could then pass through, obviously, to having a weaker outlook for inflation than we're expecting. There's a risk on the other side that we could get some combination of more persistence in the inflation effects that are gradually working from what happened a few years ago, that are gradually working their way through the system. For instance, that we won't get the sort of fall off in the level of pay settlements that we're expecting, and I think actually beginning to see signs of, but those signs turn out to be not sort of in a sense fulfilled. And that the supply capacity of the economy is weaker and doesn't start to pick up. We could also, see some rebound of energy prices, for instance. So those things are on the other side. And it's interesting you said it's being seen as a hawkish cut. Obviously, that's in relation to, I think, what was being expected. I think for us, and we've used a couple of scenarios as starting to illustrate these sort of two sides of the coin, if you like. I wasn't at all surprised. I think this is it's fairly finely balanced, which is why we're using this gradual and careful language. And I think the outcome was frankly very much reflective of the balance of opinions on the committee. In that sense, I wasn't at all surprised by it.
If there's one word I saw the most in most of the 97 pages I've read today, I think last time perhaps it would have been careful and gradual. This time it's uncertainty.
Yes.
Uncertainty,
yes.
Trade, tariffs, US. It's smattered throughout the report today as well. Even if we get a free trade deal of some type today, which we're expecting,
yes.
that uncertainty is not going away, is it?
Well, first of all, you're right about uncertainty. And you're right that the trade and tariff situation has injected uncertainty into the situation, more uncertainty into the situation. And by the way, when we've looked at it in sort of forming those views, we've looked at the trade and tariff situation sort of in two parts. One is the direct, the sense of the consequences of what's announced. And then this extra layer, as you rightly say, of the uncertainty around the sort of, what's going to happen next, what's the process for doing it, and all that. And they're both relevant, and there's more uncertainty now than certainly there was in the past. So you're right that we have to take this uncertainty effect into consideration. Look, a UK-U.S. trade agreement is very welcome in that sense, very welcome. But the UK is a very open economy. So the effects that we're seeing from trade and tariffs on the UK economy are not just a product of the bilateral trade relationship between the UK and the US, they're also a product of the whole network of relationships, US and other countries around the world. Now, I hope that what we're seeing, what we're seeing on the UK-U.S. trade side is obviously going to be the first of many, and that it will be repeated by a whole series of trade agreements. But we have to see that happen, of course, and where it actually ends up, because, of course, we are looking at tariff levels that are probably higher than they were beforehand.
Indeed, and that's mentioned in the NPR as well, the highest since 1909, I think I read. But Governor, as a student of, multilateral rounds, Doha, Uruguay, GATT, what have you, and bilateral deals, including the 3 years it took for the UK-India deal to happen, do you honestly think this could be a fully encompassing deal, given the fact it's been formed in a couple of weeks? It just seems impossible.
Well, I think we'll have to spend time studying it to take a view, to get a proper view on that. I also think that, you're right to pose this question, because I would say that we need two things now. We need obviously to deal with the situation we face at the moment, but we also need to rebuild, build the strength of what I call the multilateral trade system, because obviously it's taken a dent. Let's be honest. This is the World Trade Organization. I think it is not so right to think that everybody's bilateral trade should be in balance, because that's not how trade works. On the other hand, I think it is. I think it is fair enough to point out that where there are long-run sustained imbalances, you have to ask, why is that happening? Is it really the right thing? Is this reflective of underlying conditions that have got, in which there are, embedded issues, and how do you deal with those embedded issues? And I very much hope that out of this we'll move back towards a stronger and more robust and supported multilateral trade system.
Given what you just said and what you said in the press conference, you said, I take issue with the premise that a trade relationship should be in balance as well. But that's the premise for the Trump trade wars. Is this bad economics from the US administration?
Well, I would make this distinction between what I would call sort of longer run persistent imbalances that tell us something about the sort of structural elements of how the trading system is working and how economies are working, and what I would call sort of running balances, where and particularly bilateral running balances, where you would not expect them all to be in balance. That would not, I think, be, well, that would not, to my view, be consistent with getting the full benefits of trade.
So, given what you've just said about long-running issues and the bilateral versus multilateral relationships as well, is the key danger the one that's been identified in the US-Chinese relationship and the huge amount of tariffs we're seeing between those two parties, rather than any individual bilateral deal or not from the UK and US and others of the same kind of size?
I think the US-China relationship and where that gets to, and I hope obviously we will see progress on that front, I really do, but I think you're right to say that is really the crucial element. And certainly I've spent a bit of time, wanting to, frankly studying and talking to people, wanting to understand what really are the drivers of the issues that are coming to the surface at the moment. And I think, the China-US relationship does keep coming back, actually, in that sense, as the one. So I do think that it's, progress on that front is very important.
But is the fear beyond the current situation, the fact that we have an administration in the most important economy in the world that seems to want to use very aggressive policy, shoot first and ask questions later? And actually, we've only had 100 days of this. We've got another 3 years plus of this administration. And could that dent confidence in the UK and elsewhere, dent investment and dent growth over a longer term period? Because companies won't invest, people won't spend.
Well, I think very good question, because I think if we see persistent uncertainty and this, you're right to highlight, for instance, companies' investment, because it's quite natural for companies to say, look, making an investment is a one-off decision. I can't reverse it once I've committed, as it were. Therefore, if I perceive greater uncertainty and I'm more doubtful, I'll delay the decision. That's absolutely natural. And by the way, when I go around the country, and I do, I am hearing more of that. I have to tell you, I am hearing more of that. Now, I do think, coming back to this point, I do think, you've praised the question in the context of the US administration, I do think that we've got to work very hard, all of us, to create a multilateral system that everybody has confidence in. My message to the US administration would be, look, I understand, I hear what you're saying. We need to hear, we mustn't close our ears. We want to work with you. To make the multilateral system work in everybody's interests, including your interests, but it can't be exclusively in anybody's interests. But that's the challenge, because without that, your question is absolutely right. We will be in a less